Well, I want to welcome you, Life.Church Open Network. Thank you so much for joining us today and spending some time with us. My name is Jordan, and we are here with Pastor Jerry Hurley. Jerry, thank you for being with us.
Oh, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Pastor Jerry is one of 4 of our directional leadership team. He serves alongside our senior pastor, Craig Rochelle, in guiding the direction of Life.Church and where we're going. He is our team development leader. So what that means is that Pastor Jerry oversees how our staff grows, our culture, and whether our staff is healthy. We like to tease you a little bit, but it's also really true. Pastor Craig calls you one of his best decisions and one of his very best hires.
Well, I quit arguing with him a few years ago.
And you should not argue with him. Pastor Jerry is just wonderful, and he has transformed the way our church team, our staff, we have a staff of almost 800 right now, and Jerry has caused that staff to be strong and healthy and effective so we can reach more people for Christ. So I just want to take 1 second and pause right now. What we're going to do here in this setting is a Q&A all about a talk that Pastor Jerry gave. You can find that talk here on Open Network for free. It's called Building a High-Performing Culture. So if you've not watched that yet, stop this video, go watch that one, watch it with your team, then come back to us.
Great.
Because if you are anything like me, you watch a really great talk, you watch a TED Talk or something like that, and you think, man, I would give anything if I could talk with the person that gave that talk. I have follow-up questions, and I have questions I want to dig into. Well, that's exactly what we're going to get to do with Pastor Jerry today. So we just heard the talk in studio here today, and so we are going to ask you some follow-up questions.
Well, I'm excited. Thank you so much for, again, this time and making it available. I'm looking forward. Hopefully it'll be helpful for you, and we can just share a little bit about what God's put in our heart.
Okay, so really quick, just a quick definition. What is a high-performing church team?
Oh, a high-performing church team is a team that has the capacity, really, I would say, to do everything that God puts in front of you to do. And I think God has plans for each and every one of our churches and ministries. And I think it's incumbent upon us to try to be as ready as we possibly can. So if God has an opportunity for us, I want to make sure that we're ready to step into that. And you've got to have a team that has the capacity and the ability and the willingness to step in whenever God says, hey, I want you to go take that.
I love it. So they're healthy, they're effective, they're a ready team.
Yes.
Okay. So in your talk, you talked about disengaged employees and engaged employees.
Right.
How can I tell? Is there an assessment? Is there something to look for? How can I tell if my team is disengaged?
Well, actually, disengaged should be relatively easy to tell because they're actively not necessarily working against you, but they're likely to complain. They're likely to share negative thoughts about the team or what they feel with other people. They're likely to just bring, when they walk into a room, you can just feel the energy level just kind of go down a little bit. Those would be some telltale signs. And honestly, the one that's probably equally as challenging are the people that are they're not really disengaged, but they're what we would call satisfied team members.
Middle section.
It's that middle ground, and that seems like it's a good place to be, but generally they're just kind of taking a wait and see attitude, and they're just kind of going with the flow a little bit. And you need people that are actually fully engaged, and there's a significant difference because the fully engaged people you can tell because they are actually they're actually anticipating what you would need. They're actually bringing things to their job and their energy or thought or performance in a way that I'm not even asking for. They're just exceeding my expectations. Those are really the kinds of people that you want, that you really want more of, and those are fully engaged people. Yeah.
Okay, so as a senior pastor or as a leader, I'm looking for people that are bringing solutions. They're coming in happy. They're coming in anticipating. Maybe they're thinking about innovations or new directions for the church, things like that.
Yes.
And that's my engaged.
And even how they respond to adversity is one of those things. How they respond to change, or when a change comes, I know everybody's got to take a moment to process, but then are they excited about the change? Are they excited about meeting the challenges as they come? Those are some real telltale signs as well.
Okay, so in your talk, you talked about core values. We are a value-based culture. So you talked about sustaining attributes and our core values and mission statement and how important all of that is to our culture. You also mentioned something I want to ask about, though. You called them accidental values.
Right.
How can I tell if I have accidental values? They're those values that we fall into because we're not being intentional.
Yeah, accidental values it's any time that behaviors are happening on any kind of, first of all, people are going to make mistakes. People are going to make bad choices. And there is a difference between a single team member making a bad choice or making a mistake. That's not what I'm talking about. Accidental value is you have a sustained or a pocket of team members that are just seem to be drifting away. And so maybe it has to do with a mindset about their work. Maybe it has, an example for us was there was a particular location that we had, and they just decided that they were going to just not work the same schedule everybody else did. They decided that their meeting structure was going to look different than everybody else's. They began to have this mindset that, man, we're really the enlightened ones, and everybody else is really kind of in the dark, so to speak, because we're more flexible in our schedules, and this is a particular, and so that was something that says those values really don't line up with the rest of the church, so they would be accidental values. It'd be something that you're not intending. And so generally I would just look for kind of, you can see it's happening more than once, and it's happening in such a way where there's behavior that's happening that's inconsistent with behaviors that you would say these are kind of the norms of behavior for our organization based on how we've decided we're going to interact with one another. Those are how you can tell sometimes.
Okay, yeah, because our values can determine how we behave. They determine our behavior.
100%.
Okay, so if I'm a senior pastor or I'm a leader and I zero in on that accidental value, how long maybe should I give myself to phase that out and correct it?
Well, hopefully you can catch it soon, right? And then if you do, the thing you have to do is you have to be really obvious about it. What you have to do is you have to address it. You have to address it with the team openly.
So you would just call it out.
You have to call it out. You say, hey, here's come to my attention. This and this is happening. You don't necessarily have to be hard or harsh on people necessarily, but just point out, say, you know what, we don't behave that way here, and here's why we don't behave that way. And so just know this is not acceptable behavior. And you have to be able to call it out that clearly, because one of the things that culture, a culture that's very clear, it's easy to operate in a culture that's very clear. When a team member knows these are clearly things that are out of bounds, these are clearly things in the way my expectation of my behavior is, and that's clear, then it's easy for people to operate that way. But when it's hazy or it's muddy, and it's like, well, I don't know, these people act this way and these people behave this way and this group does this, well, what's really right?
And there's too much gray area.
There's too much gray. And so the more clarity that you can bring to your culture, these are things that we're going to do. These are things that we're not going to do. It makes it easier for that to propagate, makes it easier for people to follow, and it makes it easy to see when people aren't actually doing what they're supposed to be doing.
And then I've heard you say that I think it can take as long as a year to correct or to bring a material change to a culture.
Oh, yeah. And that would be in an ideal situation. I mean, if there is particularly, but depending on how well established it is, like we're talking an accidental value. Let's say you realize that there's values that have been happening for a period of time, and you have to change them because you're going in a different direction. Then just know that the longer that value has been playing out, it's going to give you an idea of the kind of energy it's going to take to turn that, because momentum is real.
Yes, okay.
Momentum is going to continue down that path until I have to force and act with enough force to change it. And that's the thing. So in an ideal situation, in a well-established culture, I would anticipate I'm going to have to work hard for a year to do that.
Okay.
It could even take longer than that. So it's not the time, it's just being willing. Here's what most people are unwilling to do. What most people are unwilling to do is unwilling to spend whatever time it takes to get what they want. And anything that's worth having is going to be worth effort getting there. And so you have to be willing to have the hard conversations. You have to be willing to push into it. You have to be willing for that everybody that's on your team now may not make the transition, because you're going to make a shift in behavior. You're going to make a shift in expectation, and not everybody's going to want to or be able to actually make the change. So when you think I've got to really transition this culture, it's naive to think that everybody on your team is going to actually be able to make that change. And so that's what I say when I say keeping a value or striving to a value is always going to cost you something. And so it's going to cost energy, intention. It could even cost people, as far as people that you actually care about. Always care about everybody, but people that you care about on the team. You say, man, this person may not be able to make the transition. Am I going to push through anyway? And being willing to say, I'm going to push through anyway, and it's up to this person to make the transition or not, that's where it can get hard.
Yeah. Oh, I can imagine. Yeah, because you don't ever want to let someone go.
You never want that to be the case.
If you've done everything you can, you may have to choose for the general health of the org.
Right. And here's the truth of the matter. The truth of the matter is we would say, if our mission is literally to rob hell, and populate heaven, right? And we're talking about eternity is on the line for people. And we think that this transition, how can we put a person above the mission?
Yeah.
And you'd never say, well, of course I'm going to put this person above what we think is God's best for the ministry. But when you make a decision that you're not going to make that hard, tough call with a person, when you make that decision, what you're saying is, I'm putting that person above the mission.
Right.
And that's what we have to be really, really careful with.
Yeah. Oh, that's powerful, but it's the hard part of
It's the hard part.
Building culture.
That's right.
Okay, so let's say that I have a baseline culture, we have some values, but I'm also seeing low morale, low engagement, low effectiveness, we're not meeting our goals. Excuse me, should I overhaul our values?
Well, one, I would certainly look at, is that really the problem? In other words, is it that the values aren't the right values, or is it how we're communicating them? And that could at that point that could be a leadership issue, right? So have we as leaders put things in people's way that prevent them from bringing their best? Are we allowing toxicity? Are we allowing a few people in the organization? Again, a lot of times it comes down to people. Are we allowing toxic people in the organization to bring people's morale down? Because I think most people want to be excited about the work that they do. And so I would just say, okay, well, what's getting in the way of these people feeling excited about the work that we do? Have I clearly articulated the mission and the vision? Do we have a mission that people can get excited about pouring their life into? And the truth of the matter is that if the vision is not big enough for somebody to actually consider, I'm going to give my life to that mission, then I would look at them. I would look at your articulation of the mission and the vision that you have. Yep. So I would look at as maybe it's not necessarily the values that we've chosen, how we have articulated the values, have we've made them aspirational to people. In other words, I want to live to those values, and then what have we allowed to get in the way of team members actually bringing their very best?
So it may be that there's leaders or processes in the way that are barriers.
100%.
Okay, so let's say that that's not true, and I have an amazing culture. I have a great structure. I have amazing values. We are hitting our marks, and I'm looking at hiring someone. Yes. When do I introduce that culture to a potential candidate? When do they experience who we are?
Very first conversation.
Okay.
In fact, you should look at whatever it is, like I know back in the day we didn't have a website where people could come and look for jobs and those different kinds of things, and some people may not, but the very first, however they interact with us, I want that to be reflective of our values. Okay. When they look at something on the website, when they interact with a team member, the very first conversation, it should scream values, should start to be putting out. The pace of that process should match the pace of the organization. Those things should be in sync. So from the very first moment that they interact with you around that concept of coming to be part of your team, you should be rich with those values. They should all be built around the same things.
Okay, so say that you're working with a candidate then. Sure. You've had the initial phone calls, you bring them in, maybe you're learning about them, they're learning about you, and they have an amazing skill set or an amazing background and experience, but some of their aligning values aren't there. They don't align with our org, but the rest of their resume looks amazing. Can they learn how to have those aligning values? Should I go ahead and hire them?
I would say no. Because, again, as people, we overestimate what we can develop. Mm-hmm. Interestingly enough, what we really can develop are the actual skill sets. That's what we can develop. We can develop a skill set. We can help somebody learn something. I can't put passion inside of you. Mm. I can't. DNA is your DNA. God made you fearfully and wonderfully exactly the way that he made you. And for me to think that I can somehow put those things inside of you, it's really, really difficult. And as leaders, I think that's almost impossible. It's hard enough pulling what's inside of you out and getting the most out of you, the amazing things God's put in. For me to think I could put something in you is a mistake that we often make as leaders because we overestimate our ability to actually develop.
Yeah, I can change them or help them.
Yeah, and you can't. And so that's what I say, values cost you something. And really the truth of the matter is, if that person's passions aren't aligned with yours, if they don't have the right kind of stuff inside of them to fit and to be successful over the course of time, we're actually doing both of us a disservice. Because anytime somebody's, like, let's say you make the decision, you bring them onto the team, they're there for a year or 2 or 18 months, whatever it is, and it doesn't work out, we've robbed 18 months of God's plan for their life from them.
Their life, for what we're working on.
And then the person that was supposed to be in that role. And so the values always trump talent. But here's the caveat to that. It's not that we don't need talented people. It's like if we have a really talented person, but they don't have our values, they can't be on our team. But that doesn't mean that we take people that don't have talent and bring them on just because they do have our values. They both have to be existing. So we have to have very talented people that fit our values, and those two things together is what equals somebody being on our team.
So we're going to err on maybe the hiring process taking longer to find the right candidate
100%.
Rather than jumping into someone
100%.
that's a halfway fit.
That's right. And that's one of those things. Keeping that value is going to cost you something. It's going to make it more difficult at times. Not always, but sometimes. And you just have to be willing to say, you know what? I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait for the right person. I'm going to wait for the right time and not get caught up in the moment, because we get caught up in the moment because we're feeling the pressure.
Yeah.
And we know that there's things to do.
That role.
And we just have to trust that God's going to bring the right person when the time is right.
Okay, last question,
Sure.
Jerry. You talked a lot, kind of like location.
Right.
You talked a lot about consistency,
Yes.
consistency. So as a leader, one of your roles is to drive culture in your organization. You own it, and you're going to help lead your team through owning it also, so
Right.
that they own it too. And you do that by being consistent. So what are some
100%.
really practical, maybe the communication touch points where you are consistent in
Yes.
culture?
You know, being the chief reminding officer, you have to talk over and over and over and over again, because vision leaks, culture drifts. It is naturally, all the forces at work are not unifying your team. All the forces in nature are going to try to degrade that. That's what happens. And so you just have to stay consistent and over and over and over again, and talk about your values and talk about why you exist. Give examples of it. Reward people when they exhibit those values. Celebrate the wins associated with those things. And then the other thing you have to do is just avoid the introduction of just chasing the latest thing. You know, you can't chase the latest leadership book fad. You can't chase all those things. Are those things, do you learn from them? Yes, you do. But you have to be really intentional about the core foundation of what makes your culture you. What does it mean to be part of that team? And those things should be consistent over years and years and years of time. And if you can't go back to that, what you're missing is truly building a language that's actually part of that actually just extends beyond everything, and actually having efficiency and being effective with all the tools that you're working. And if you're constantly chasing all those things, you'll never build that competency that you need to build around those sets of values.
Where it's crystal clear and it's a strong foundation.
That's exactly right.
Okay, so Pastor Jerry, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. I wasn't going to shake your hand, but let's do it. Tell me, if I'm a pastor watching, just kind of give me a pep talk, though. Maybe we don't have a great culture. Maybe I'm just trying to even understand what you mean by culture. Give me a little bit of a pep talk, though, about why it's worth the investment.
You know, it's worth the investment because, one, God has a plan for your ministry, and God called you and made you the leader, and he didn't do that by accident. And what I would just try to do is connect with the passion that God has put inside of you, that think back to the reason, the why, that you actually stepped away from whatever it was and you took this big chance, you took this big risk, and God had this vision inside of you that he had something for you to do. And I would just connect with that passion and then just take it a day at a time, and consistency over time builds results. And so don't look at the end result and think, oh my gosh, I can never get there. Do what I can do today. And if I can do what I can do today, it's going to set me up to do something tomorrow that I may not be able to today. And in a year from now, I'm going to be set up to do things that I didn't think. People look at Life.Church where it is today, and it's like, oh my gosh. Yeah. But it didn't start out that way. It started just doing the little things right day by day by day. And so don't be overwhelmed. Don't be discouraged. There is hope, and God has a plan and a purpose for you and your ministry. And he wants more than anything else to connect with that in a way that is special. And so listen to what God is telling you, connect to his passion for whatever it is he's called you to do, and then build from there.
Well, Pastor Jerry, thank you so much for sharing this with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.